And now the last video for UFC 281. Starting with Dan Hooker against Claudio Puelles. Puelles has some great grappling with like 4 knee bars on his record. With a purple belt in luta livre, which is a similar kind of form to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In terms of the goal is the same, submit your opponent. He's 5-1 in the UFC, having won his last 5 fights. Now Dan Hooker, you guys know who Dan Hooker is. He's got a 3-inch reach advantage. He's going to be 4 inches taller. He's got elite striking. He's aggressive. He likes to push the action. He's definitely going to have the stand-up advantage in this fight, and he's not afraid of a slugfest. And on top of that, he's got solid takedown defense. However, he's 1-5 in his last fights. But my heart is sticking with Dan Hooker, so I'm going to take him in this fight. Now on to Frankie Edgar against Chris Gutierrez. Gutierrez is 10 years younger, 6-1 in the UFC, having won his last 6 fights, a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's pretty well-rounded. Now Frankie Edgar's at the later stages of his career. You guys know who he is. He's an all-time great, former UFC lightweight champion with 3 successful title defenses. And he's 4-6 in the last 10 fights, and he said this is going to be his retirement fight. And sad to say it, I feel like Chris Gutierrez is going to win. Frankie just hasn't been able to perform as well as he used to in the past few years. Sadly for this fight, I'm going to take Chris Gutierrez. Now that I've gotten through those 2 very quickly, let's talk Poirier versus Chandler. This is the people's main event. 2 of the greatest lightweights in the world who are so alike are going to meet each other inside the octagon come this weekend. Chandler's going to have the wrestling advantage. Poirier is going to have the boxing advantage. But neither one of these guys are scared of a slugfest, as proven in the past. They've both been in tremendous wars. Poirier having wars with Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Dan Hooker, Max Holloway. And as for Michael Chandler, he's had wars with the likes of Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gaethje, Patricky Pitbull. On top of that, he's a 3-time Bellator lightweight champion and a certified future Bellator Hall of Famer. And at this rate, it looks like he's going to be a future UFC Hall of Famer too. And same goes for Poirier. He's got some of the best boxing in the UFC. He's had some of the most exciting fights in the UFC. Both guys so tough. Both guys granite chins. Both guys only lose to the best. This is the fight I'm looking forward to the most in this weekend, and I think it's going to steal the show. I feel like this fight's going to be mainly a stand-up fight. I think every time that this fight goes to the ground, if it does end up going to the ground, I think it's not going to be there long. Both guys are so eager to get up every time they get taken down. Chandler's got super explosive movements. Poirier's a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. I think both of these guys are pretty dead even in this fight. I'm expecting this fight to be all over the cage. I'm expecting a Dustin Poirier finish. So for this fight, I'm taking Dustin Poirier. And now for the co-main event. Carla Esparza against Zhang Weili. Carla, the champion, having won her last fight in one of the most boring fights of all time. But never mind that, she's got a very patented wrestling background, and she's also the first ever UFC strawweight champion. She's got more patience when it comes to fighting, and she likes to get grind out decisions. And she's also got more years under her belt. But her opponent, Zhang Weili, is very well rounded, but will definitely have a stand-up advantage in this fight. Zhang also being a former champ, and definitely the greatest Chinese UFC fighter of all time, at least up to this point. Now she likes to push the action, she likes to put heavy pressure on her opponents, and she's got a lot of power. Plus most of her fights end by KO. Now I know Zhang Weili's coming to fight. The question is Carla Esparza going to freeze up again like she did against Rose? Because if she does, Zhang's going to run away with this fight. But what I'm thinking is if she doesn't, I think she's going to have a hard time taking Weili down. Weili's too aggressive. I feel like she's not going to give her the chance to even get close enough to grab the leg or clinch up or anything like that. Because every time she gets close to her, she's going to fire off shots. And they're going to hurt. And I think she's probably going to dominate Carla Esparza on the feet. So for this fight, I'm going to take Zhang Weili. And I feel like she might finish Carla. So for this fight, I'm going to take Zhang Weili. Now to the main event. Israel Adesanya against Alex Pereira. You guys know who these two are. Izzy's obviously the current champ. 5 title defenses under his belt. Very smart, very strategic, and he's 23-1 in MMA. Now, Alex Pereira was the first ever champ in Glory, holding both the middleweight and light heavyweight belts at the same time. He also went 33-7 in kickboxing, but he's got a 6-1 record in MMA, having won his last 6 fights. And most of his fights end in knockout. Currently 3-0 in the UFC. In his debut, he got a flying knee knockout pretty much right off the bat. His second fight, he had a pretty close fight against Bruno Silva. And in his last fight, he knocked out Sean Strickland. But what not a lot of people seem to be talking about is the fact that Izzy has a 75-5 kickboxing record, Having won several kickboxing tournaments, I think Izzy is just as good as Alex is on the stand-up. And on top of that, this isn't kickboxing. This is MMA. Now, we saw Alex Pereira kind of struggle with Bruno Silva. Plus, the 2 losses that Izzy took to Alex were so long ago. I think so much has changed. Izzy has evolved. Izzy has grown and gotten better over time. I feel like this is a fight that Izzy's been preparing for years now, even before Alex probably came to the UFC. Plus, his coach Eugene Behrman is one of the smartest coaches in MMA right now. This fight's definitely going to be a stand-up fight, at least for the most part. And this is such a close fight. It's very hard to predict how I think it's going to go, but my gut is telling me Izzy's going to win it. So for the main event of UFC 281, I'm going to be taking Israel Adesanya. And to recap for the main card, I'm taking Dan Hooker, Chris Gutierrez, Dustin Poirier, Zhang Weili, and Israel Adesanya. And that's all I got for y'all now. So I hit like, subscribe, and all that.